Hey everyone, today we're going to go ahead and learn about the basic chemistry unit, which is chapter 2, basic chemistry. So why are we studying chemistry in a biology class? Chemistry is the foundation of biology. So chemistry is the foundation of biology. Why? Because everything is made up of matter. So matter is made up of atoms. This is going back to like 8th grade. Okay, so if you recall, we have an atom, and an atom is made up of our protons, our neutrons, and electrons. So protons here are found in the nucleus, along with the neutrons. And then on the outside of the atom is your electrons, right? Here's the video that you guys can watch on your own on how small is an atom. It's a TED Ed video, so I would recommend that you watch all of these small TED Ed videos, please. All right, life requires around 25 chemical elements. So about 25 elements are essential for life. 4 elements make up 96% of living matter. They include carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. I also like to know them as HONC so that you remember HONC. HONC. So please make sure you guys know that these are the 4 most important elements of all life. Okay. There's other elements that also help make up the remaining 4%, and that's going to be phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, and potassium. So phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, and potassium. So all of these elements here are used to build us. So calcium, if you guys recall, calcium we find in our bones. Our bonding properties include the effect of electrons. So whenever elements bond together, they bond using the outermost electron shells. So electrons determine the chemical behavior of the atom. So it depends on the number of electrons that are found in the atom's outermost shell, also known as these valence shells. Okay, so if you notice, you have your nucleus, which has the protons and neutrons, and on the outside are the electrons. Okay, the first shell, as we see here, can hold 2 electrons. Every shell thereafter holds a total of 8 electrons. As we see here. Okay, now electrons are most happiest when they have 8 electrons on their outermost shell. If they have 8 electrons, then there's no place for them to bond. Okay. All right, the effect of electrons. So the chemical behavior of an atom depends on the number of electrons, as we said, in its valence shell. So let's count. So how does this atom behave? So I have 2, 4, 6 electrons. Now, that means that I have room for 2 more electrons to fit here. Okay. So that has room for 2 more, because remember we said all electrons have their valence shells filled when they have 8. This one only has 2 electrons, so this one has room for 6 electrons to fill in. Okay, so as we see here, it has 2 electrons. So it has room here, it has room here, and it also has room here to fill in the shell. So how does this atom behave, and how does this atom behave? So as we can see, it would be beneficial if these 2 atoms here wanted to bond. These 2 electrons will be attracted to this side here. Why? Because as we can see here, it'd be easier for this atom here to share its electrons and fill up this outermost shell. All right, next you guys have another TED Ed video to watch on how atoms bond. Same thing, please make sure to watch this video, as these videos are very helpful. So the chemical reactivity. Atoms tend to complete a partially filled valence shell, or they empty a partially filled valence shell. So this tendency drives chemical reactions, and it creates our bonds. So atoms are either giving up electrons or they're sharing electrons. So they're giving up or they're sharing electrons. All right, these are the bonds that you have to know in biology. So these are the bonds that you have to know in biology. There's only a few, and we will be studying them throughout the year. Okay, so the first bonds that we're going to talk about are hydrogen bonds. So hydrogen bonds are obviously, as we see in the name, it's a bond between two hydrogen atoms. Okay, so it's a bond between a positive and a negative end. They form what are called hydrophobic and hydrophilic interactions. We also have van der Waals forces, ionic bonds, and then our strong bonds, which include our covalent bonding. But let's look at covalent bonds. So why is this considered a strong bond? Well, two atoms share a pair of electrons. Both atoms are holding onto the electrons and they're very stable and they form our molecules. So if I look here between gas has one electron, or hydrogen has one electron in its outer shell. So remember we said the first electron can hold two. So as we see here, this here is going to form a covalent bond because they're going to share our electrons. They're sharing the electrons. Okay. All right. When we look at water, water is going to form also covalent bonds. So where is the covalent bond going to be formed in our water molecule? So it's going to be formed here and here. So if we look at water, water's H2O. Oxygen essentially has a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons in its outer shell. And remember we said hydrogen has one electron. So that one electron is going to come here. This one is going to come here, and then they bond. Okay, these form electrons. These are shared bonds, and these are strong. These are strong. Now, there's certain items in our bodies that we don't want to break apart easily. Okay, we want to be able to hold some things, and so that's why it's important to know this. So let's take, for example, DNA. So if you guys recall, DNA is double helix, right? And it's made up of our our nitrogen bonds. Okay, and it forms like that twisted chain. When we look at DNA, okay, the outer bonds are going to be covalent bonds. We want the outside bondings to be strong. The inner bondings found in DNA are formed of a weaker bond called a hydrogen bond. Why would I want the bonds in between DNA to be weak? Well, yeah, DNA has to replicate. So when it replicates, the nitrogen bonds separate. And as they separate, it needs to have a little bit of energy. We don't want the outside to separate, so that forms our covalent bond or our strand. In some cases, we can have what are called as multiple covalent bonds. So two atoms can share more than one pair of electrons. We can have what's known as a double covalent bond or a triple covalent bond. These here are these are very, very, very strong bonds. So these rarely fall apart. So these types of bonds rarely fall apart. And they are our strongest of our strongest bonds. Okay. All right, let's look at this example, which is called our polar covalent. Okay, so our polar covalent bonds pair, our electrons are shared unequally by two atoms. So it's a pair of electrons that are shared unequally by two atoms. An example of anything that is polar covalent is going to be water. Water is made up of oxygen and hydrogen, as we know. So oxygen has a stronger attraction for the electrons than hydrogen. So if I just look at this atom here, why do you think oxygen would have a stronger attraction than hydrogen? Just take a look at it. Yeah, it's bigger. Because it's bigger, it does carry more electrons to it. It's a larger molecule. And as we notice here, oxygen has a total of 6 electrons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as we recalled earlier. Okay, because it has 6 electrons in its outermost shell. Okay, hydrogen only has 1. So we have 1 here, and then we also have 1 here. Okay, because it's bigger, there's more electronegativity on this end. So electronegativity means that it has more electrical powers on one side. Hydrogen on the opposite end has positive. Now, water acts like a magnet. If you call it magnetic attractions, Positive attracts negative, and negative attracts positive. So oxygen has what's known as a higher electronegativity. Because of that, water is a polar molecule. Water is polar molecule because it has positive ends and it has negative ends. And it leads to many interesting properties of water. Here's another video on polar bonds and molecules. Same thing. Please make sure to watch this brief video to give you a better visual example. All right, let's talk about hydrogen bonding. So we've talked about covalent bonds. We talked about polar covalent bonds. The other bonding properties that you need to know is that of hydrogen bonds. So polar water creates molecular attractions. So the positive hydrogen atom in one water molecule is attracted to the negative in another water. Also can occur wherever there's an OH or hydroxide exists in a larger molecule. Hydrogen bonds are very weak. So let's go ahead and take a look here. As we stated, here's our negative N, and hydrogen is positive. So when one water molecule attracts to another molecule, this positive molecule here is going to attract to the negative molecule here, and it's going to form what is known as a hydrogen bond. A hydrogen bond, and this is found in water. Now, hydrogen bonds are weak. They're very weak. So in bio, hydrogen bonds are weak. And you need to know that. Once again, like we said, we also find hydrogen bonds that are found in the middle of DNA. And same thing, we want that bond to be weak so that when it unzips or when it starts to replicate, it takes less energy for it to separate. Please go ahead and watch this video here, another TED Ed video on how polarity makes water behave strangely. So how polarity makes water behave strangely. All right, let's get into our next unit, which is the chemistry of life, also known as our properties of water. Properties of water. We're going to talk about water. Why? Because all life occurs in water. We found water found inside and outside of your cells. So inside of your cells is filled with water, known as our cytosol or our cytoplasm, and the outside is filled in water. So the cells have water inside and outside. So the chemistry of water, like we just stated, water molecules form hydrogen bonds with each other. There's a positive attracted to a negative, and it creates what's known as a sticky molecule. What does it mean by sticky? Well, if you were to get 2 drops of water together, so once again, if you were to get 2 drops of water, they form almost like a magnet. That magnet then will form a big puddle. Okay, why does that occur? Why does water occur? Why does water form puddles? Well, water is going to form the puddle because, like we said, the negative end of the hydrogen is going to be attracted to the positive end of the hydrogen. It's going to form a hydrogen bond, and as we stated here, this bond is weak and allows for water to stick to itself. Okay, don't get confused though. Remember, water attracted to water is hydrogen. The hydrogen attracted to the oxygen bond here, that's covalent. So that one is strong. That one is strong. This one is going to be weak. Water is known as the elixir of life. So there's some special properties of water. Now, even though water is not living, it is vital for life. Without water, there would be no life. So these are some important properties that you guys have to know. You have to know these properties. Okay, so you will be tested, you will be quizzed, so make sure that you recollect what these properties are. All right, we have cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion and adhesion allows for surface tension and capillary action of our water. Water is a good solvent. Many molecules dissolve in water, or sometimes I like to say the solution to pollution is dilution. Eventually, if you dilute everything out, it will dissolve. We have hydrophilic versus hydrophobic ends. Water has a lower density as a solid, meaning that ice floats. Water also has a high specific heat, so water stores a whole lot of heat. And it also has a high heat of vaporization, meaning that it heats and it cools slowly. Heats and cools slowly. So let's take a look at each one individually. Here's another video, like we said, of the properties of water. Please watch this video before you continue on with the rest of the lecture. It'll help you out a little bit more. All right, let's look at cohesion and adhesion. Cohesion and adhesion. So water bonding between water molecules is known as cohesion. So when water sticks to itself, water is sticky, and it forms what is known as surface tension. That's what allows us to drink water through a straw. So if you had a straw and you're drinking water, those water molecules are going to attract to each other, and you're going to be able to obviously drink the water through the straw. Okay. Water bonding between water and something else is known as adhesion. They kind of go hand in hand. So water sticks to itself is called cohesion. Water sticking to something else is known as adhesion. And it forms what is known as capillary action. Capillary action is where the water is going to attract to the sides of the straw. So not only is it going to attract to the straw, but it's going to attract to the sides of the straw. Okay. Whenever we're measuring water in like a test tube, water is going to bend and it forms this meniscus. Meniscus. Why? Because the water is attracted to the glass on the side. Water climbs up the paper towel or through cloth through the same pressures of cohesion and adhesion. Okay, so let's take, for example, drinking sugar through a straw. Okay, you really can't drink sugar to the straw. I mean, you could suck it up with the air and your force. However, if you were just trying to drink sugar molecules through a straw, it's not going to be sticky, meaning the sugar molecules don't stick to themselves, nor do they stick to the side of the straw. Okay, so that's a better visual, nor do they stick to the side of the straw. Why? Because they don't have the properties of adhesion and cohesion like water. So how does water get up to the top of a tree? So as we see here, transpiration is built on what is known as cohesion and adhesion, okay? So meaning, if you think about it, plants obviously need water. As it rains, the water is going to go down to the bottom of the roots. Through capillary pressure or osmotic pressure, water enters through the roots and it's going to travel up the tree, up through the roots, and then all the way to the top of the leaves. It does this through this property of cohesion and adhesion, meaning water sticks to itself and it also sticks to the side, also known as the xylem. Okay, so it allows for the water to travel up, up, up against gravity and then out to the top of the tree. Here's a brief video on the importance of water properties for the plant, also known as transpiration. All right, water is the universal solvent of life. So polarity makes water a good solvent. Anything that is polar can dissolve in water. So just remember, if anything is polar, it dissolves in water, meaning that it's attracted to the positive and the negative ends of the water. So polar water molecules surround the positive and negative ions. Solvents dissolve solutes, creating what are known as solutions. So let's take, for example, just looking right here at salt water, When we get salt water, basically what's going on is salt, which is known as NaCl, is attracted to the water molecules or the H2O. These molecules then can disperse and can be dissolved in the water, where they're translucent, okay? Another example here would be, as we see here, a protein such as an enzyme being dissolved in our water, or being attracted to water molecules. All right, do you dissolve in water? There's a few terms that you need to know. This term right here is hydrophilic. And if I look at the term hydro in itself means water, and philic means love. Okay, so this is a water lover. So substances that attract to water are known as polar. So anything that can attract or dissolve in water are known as polar molecules, Anything that does not attract in water is known as hydrophobic. So if I look at hydro's water, phobic means fear. So these have water fearing. So they're water fearing. Okay, that means that they don't attract to water. So these substances that don't have an attraction to water are known as non-polar, and that would be like our oils or our fats. So as we hear the term water and oil don't mix, they do not mix. Why is that? Because the water is polar, whereas these molecules that are found in butter and oil are known as nonpolar. Okay, so that means that their shells on their outside are completely filled. Because these molecules are completely filled, they don't have room to bond with anything else. So in that instance, they don't bind. They don't bind with water and they separate. All right, let's look at the next property of water, the special case of ice. Most or all substances that are more dense when they're solid, but not water. As a solid, water floats or ice floats. And it's important because the hydrogen bonds form what is known as a crystal. So let's take a look at the regular bonding of water. If we look here, here's our water molecules. Okay, when it's colder, these hydrogen bonds push farther apart. As they push farther apart, they form what is known as this crystal lattice, okay? So what does this crystal lattice do? It allows for the ice to form. And as it forms, it creates, obviously, ice and allows it to float on top of the water, okay? Here's some more examples of how ice floats looks like. Why is this even important? Why do we want to know why ice is floating? So why ice floats is important. Oceans and lakes don't freeze solid. So if you can envision during the winter, obviously it gets really cold. We do know that lakes freeze. Now they don't ever freeze solid. They never freeze solid. Okay? Why is that? Surface ice insulates the water below, meaning that just the top few layers of water is going to freeze. Okay? It then allows for life to survive in the winter. It allows for life to survive in the winter. So that means that the organisms that live in the water below become insulated from the top layer of the ice. If ice sank, ponds, lakes, and even oceans would freeze solid. And in the summer, only few inches would thaw out. It also creates the seasonal turnover of lakes or the cycling of nutrients. So what does that mean? Basically, when the ice starts to melt during the spring and summer months, it allows for these nutrients because the water is going to be less dense, so it's going to start to mix. And as it mixes, it sinks. And as it sinks, it forms these nutrient turnovers, Here's another important video, same thing that I would like for you guys to see on why does ice float in water? Why does ice float in water? Okay. Right. Ice also has what is known as a high specific heat. So water resists changes in temperature. It has what is known as a high specific heat, meaning it takes a lot to heat up, but it takes just as much to cool down. So water moderates the temperature on Earth. Let's take, for example, looking at ocean communities, or our beach communities. During the day, as the sun is heating up, the water is going to take in all of the sun's rays. Okay, as it takes in the sun's rays, in the evening, the water then is going to release that temperature. It's going to release it. Okay, as it releases, it forms this blanket around this community, which basically keeps the environment pretty stable in terms of its temperature. So it helps to moderate the temperature on Earth. Another example would be drinking coffee or tea. Okay, so whenever you're going to boil water, it takes a lot of energy to heat the water. Okay, so let's say it's going to take you, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 minutes for water to boil. Okay, now in order for the water to get back to room temperature, it's going to take a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy to cool it down. So as much energy as it needed for it to heat up, it takes just as much for it to cool down. So in my case, whenever I drink something hot, I don't drink it right away. I actually have to wait about an hour or so till it's at the right temperature, All right, here's some other videos on water properties. Please make sure to watch these videos. Please make sure to watch. All right, let's look at the ionization of water and pH. So we're going to get into another topic, the ionization of water and pH. All right, now water splits off from, the hydrogen splits off from water and it leaves what is known as OH negative. Okay, if the hydrogen concentration is less than the hydroxide, water is said to be neutral. So what are we talking about? We're looking at pH levels, and I know many of you guys hear that pH levels in my body, my pH is off, or the water's pH is off. Well, what does that mean? If I look at H2O, when I break H2O down, H2O forms H plus and OH minus. H is H2 and then one O, water, right? Or if I have H plus OH, it gives me H2O. Now, if I have more hydrogen than I do of hydroxide, if the hydrogen level is more, water is said to be acidic. If the hydrogen level is less than the hydroxide level, then water is said to be basic. Our systems are here at neutral, meaning that the hydrogen and hydroxide levels are very, very equal. Okay, pH scale is going to measure how acid or basic a solution is. So we go from 1 through 7 and then from 7 to 14. All right, so anything at 7 and around here is said to be pretty neutral. Water, milk, blood, for the most part, okay? Anything less than 7 is said to be acidic. So some things that are acidic are like coffee, vinegar, your stomach acid, which is very, very highly acidic, lemons, tomato. So how do we know something is acidic? Well, it has like a sour taste. Just think of lemon, okay? And it stings. So if you have a cut and lemon gets on your cut, you're right, it burns, right? We can already feel that, okay? Stomach acids, why is it so acidic? Well, it has to break down the food that you just ate or that you eat, okay? It has to break it down into smaller components. All right, anything above 7 are known as our bases or alkaline. That includes like baking soda, your stomach tablets, some soaps, bleach, ammonia solution, or basically all of our cleaning products, All right, finally, buffers and cellular regulation. So why do we have to know this decomposition of water, pH? Why is that important to us? Well, in terms of us and our chemistry, we need to know what the pH of our system is and what does our body do to compensate when our pH is off. So the pH of the cells must be kept at or around 7. Okay, the pH affects the shape of the molecules. And if you guys recall way back when you learned about biology last year, we talked about enzymes. And we know that one thing that affects enzymes are the pH. pH levels in your system can kill you if they're not at proper levels. So if you've ever heard of carbonic acid poisoning or carbon monoxide poisoning, carbon monoxide is a gas that we can breathe in. Okay, that gas then can change the pH of our systems. If it changes the pH, it causes our blood to become more acidic. As the blood becomes more acidic, your body doesn't function in that specific environment. And if it doesn't function, you don't function. And in return, that can lead to death. So the shape of the molecules affect the function, as we said. pH affects cellular functions. We have what are known as buffers. And buffers help to keep our pH levels within that range that we talked about. So we have a reservoir of hydrogen ions. So we donate them when the hydrogen falls and we absorb them when we have too much. All right, so an example. You eat your food, okay? Your food now is going to go into your stomach, okay? As you swallow, stomach, like we said, contains high acids of hydrochloric acid. And we said here, the acid is going to break down the foods. Now, as it breaks down the foods, that broken down food with enzymes is known as chyme. Okay, so chyme is digested foods with hydrochloric acid. From there, the stomach, the food now is going to enter into the small intestines. And in the small intestines, the body is now going to go ahead and take out the nutrients. Now, before the food can enter into the small intestines, we have to add what is known as a buffer. Why? If I don't add a buffer, then the chyme or the food with the digestive enzymes will burn through the walls of the small intestines. So we add an enzyme which is similar to baking soda from the pancreas inside of the small intestines. And that helps to buffer the digested food that can then enter into the small intestines and do the job that it needs. Okay. A good example that some of us are familiar with as well is like Tums. Tums acts as a buffer. So if you ate too much chili or you have indigestion, indigestion is caused when the stomach acids seep up into the esophagus or in your throat and it burns. So in order to control that burning sensation, one, you would either drink milk or two, you would have Tums. And that buffer now is going to get us back into our normal pH levels. All right, here are a few videos. Please watch these two. We have the science behind Tums, so it talks about the buffer itself, and then how they work in our systems. All right, everyone, that is all for today, and hopefully you learned something new about chemistry of our systems, water and water properties, and pH. And have a great day.